Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Senkos, head teachers, and people at the university, and those of you who are from further afield. This conference is the culmination of a 3.5-year project, extended because of the pandemic, which has involved Derby schools, PSG, SSG, the local authority, Department for Education, and the university in a shared endeavour to improve outcomes for children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities in Derby City. The achievements of the OA Send project are generated through collaboration, and that's a collaboration which everyone here today is continuing to support and contribute to. So on behalf of the OA board, may I take this opportunity to thank you for your participation. Many of you here today will have been involved in some way in the SEND peer review, and it is this work that underpins today's proceedings, be that the research presented by the keynotes, Professor Debs Robinson, the chosen theme of Andre Imich's keynote, and the OA inclusion work and legacy planning, which Debbie Gearing will speak about later, as well as all the afternoon's workshops. May I also extend a very warm welcome to those of you who are joining us from localities other than Derby City. The OA Send team in Derby are delighted to be sharing what they've learnt with a wider audience and really welcome your engagement. So from all of us here, thank you ever so much. So over now to talk about the conference and the platform which we're on. So I'm just going to click on a slide. Okay, so this is the agenda for the conference. I've done the welcome myself, as you've been hearing, and then we'll be handing over to Andre Imich, and then we shall have a break time at 10:30, and then we'll be having a second keynote, which is about the work of the opportunity area and the research findings from Professor Debs Robinson. And then an update on the OA work and where it's going next from Debbie Gearing. And then I won't run through all the workshops, but as you can see, they're laid out there for this afternoon. And I recommend that you have a look at which ones you're really interested in going to, and then you can select those. So it's a pleasure to have you here at this online event. Of course, it's a bit different than all getting together in one space, but I hope no less engaging. So first of all, well done for registering and getting into this session. If at any point throughout the day you have any technical difficulties and can't locate the session you're trying to be in, you can just go back to the reception page of the conference, which is located in an icon on the left. And then click on the help desk. I've been in there myself twice this morning already, and they're wonderful. And you'll find Dan's in there at the moment, Michael is around, and Paul will also be there this afternoon. And they'll be able to help you out with any technical issues if you're feeling that you can't find where you're wanting to go to, etc. Also, if you click on the reception icon, you'll be able to see which events are currently happening. So as we get towards the afternoon, you'll be able to click on the workshop that you want to go to. Just like a face-to-face conference, you can chat in sessions. You can, oh, excuse me. We just have a sip of water. You can send direct messages to others at the conference, and you can ask questions. So let's try that now for just a moment. If you have a look and click onto the people section of the conference, located towards the top right of your screen, and you scroll down, you'll be able to find your name and the names of everyone else who's here at the conference. If you can locate your own name and then click on the name of the person near you, or a name that you recognize, and see when you click on that, you'll see that you can send them a message. So, okay, this is the equivalent of turning to the person next to you and saying hello, but in an online way. So let's just see if you can send a message to someone else at the conference. I'll give you a moment to do that. Paul, can you see messages coming in from people?
Not me directly. Hang on. There's a couple of people on the chat saying that they can't get into the back room. Oh, we've got one from Kath. There's a few messages on the right hand side, but I think the people one is a direct message. So, okay. But on the chat, there's a few people saying 2 things there. If you want to look at that.
Fantastic. What you might want to do is you might want to use the chat to say hello to someone now, if that's easier. So please feel free to post. You'll also see that you can schedule meetings with a person. So you can invite them to a video call, and in the break times and the lunch times, you can catch up with people as well. You'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, there is a networking function on the platform. If you click that function at break time, you'll meet with people for 5 minutes with someone else who's using the function at the same time. After 5 minutes, the call will end. You can extend the meeting if you like, just as you would if you were standing by the coffee machine. You can keep going for longer. You can exchange contact details electronically, or you can just say goodbye, just as you would at any other conference. Near the people function and the chat function, you'll also see there's a Q&A function. I'll keep my eye on the Q&A throughout this morning's events particularly. And what I will do is I will gather your questions together at the end to put to the presenters. So please do use this function. You can ask questions anonymously or include your names. It's entirely up to you. If you particularly like a question that someone else has asked, do click the like function, because that will rate those questions and move them to the top of the list and help me to pick out those ones that are most important to everybody. Just to let you know that both sessions this morning are going to be recorded and this afternoon. So you'll be able to catch up with anything if you miss it after the event, but also be aware from a filming perspective that these videos will be posted. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Andre Imich. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Andre. He's well known in the field of special educational needs. And since April 2010, Andre has been working for the DFE in the role of SEN and Disability Professional Advisor. He's extremely well known and respected by those in the field. And more widely in education, his significant contributions were instrumental in shaping the Children and Families Act and other key SEND legislation. Andre is an experienced teacher, educational psychologist and senior officer in local authorities. He was a director in the National Strategies SEN Advisory Team, providing support and challenge to local authorities in implementing the government's strategy for special educational needs. He's also worked as an advisor to Brian Lamb, who you may remember a couple of years ago was our keynote presenter. As you know, the work of the Opportunity Area is funded by the DFE. So it gives me the greatest pleasure to welcome Andre and to speak with us here today about SEN leadership, current challenges and ways forward. So a little ahead of time, which is unusual for a conference, I'm going to hand straight over to Andre, if that's okay with you, Andre.
That's fine, Jerry. I'm now going to share my screen.
Oh, Paul?
Sorry. We've got Kath Mitchell on the call now. She's managed to join us. So do you want to go to Kath first? Sorry.
I will stop sharing.
So we'll let Kath do her bit and then Andre be on extra, because I know there was a few issues this morning, so we kind of retook the time. So sorry, Andre, just to cut in there.
No problem at all.
Just so we can have Kath do her bit first. Thank you. Thank you for standing in.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
We can, Kath, that's lovely.
Okay, I'm really sorry that I was late, but I clearly didn't follow all my instructions and I arrived into all different parts and it kept pushing me out. However, just to say, I'm Professor Kathryn Mitchell, I'm the Vice-Chancellor at the University of Derby, but for this conference, most importantly, I'm Chair of the Opportunity Area Derby. First of all, a huge welcome to everybody to the second OA-funded SEND conference, and it's a great privilege to be here today. I really feel extremely proud of the people that will be partaking today, I'm also delighted by the quality and calibre of the speakers, and Andre, you're already nearly got a head start. So, you know, it's fabulous to have people participating. But this project of the OA has been, it's now moving into its 5th year. And the work that many of the, I suppose the conference is a culmination of 3.5 years of people's commitment to looking at SEND and inclusion in the city of Derby. And it's a collaboration of all of our SEND schools, our primary school group, our secondary school group, really importantly, the local authority, who I think over the last 4 years have really participated well with all of our schools and all of our communities. But fundamentally, the DFE, because initially, I think we were a little bit anxious that this city got the opportunity area money. And now I think working with the DFE and also listening to the minister, the opportunity areas are seen as one of the most successful base-based projects that has ever been for education. And personally, somebody who has worked in education all my life, I was not as knowledgeable about SEND and inclusion and of the importance that we should be placing on the way and the education in that area, because actually it fundamentally for me supports the delivery of education for everybody. Because if we can get inclusion right, then for me, we will get education right. So there has been huge successes in the last 3.5 years of this project. And it has, for me, meant that participation across our city between also all the areas I've mentioned, but fundamentally for me and proudly for me, the role the university's been able to play is really important, because I don't think we were as close to our city, and I don't think that actually we're all benefiting from each other in the way that we have been over the last 3.5 years. And I suppose for me, this conference is only the second, and I hope to be, you know, when I'm probably old and grey, I'm quite grey now at the moment. I just needed to, you know, make changes to the colour of my hair, but I am grey, particularly with a pandemic. But what I would say to you is that I hope I'm still attending as an attendee in 10 years' time to this conference. So many of you, I am certain, are not part of Derby City, and so we're delighted that you've joined us today. And I'm sure that you're involved in SEND peer review, which has been fundamental, I think, to the work that we've done in Derby. But also, I'm really keen as a chair of an OA to now start to look for partners across nations, across cities in the UK. But I would be really keen that from this conference, we can look at new ways of funding partnership around SEND and inclusion. We're really, I think, lucky today that we have got the outstanding speakers, and I'm sorry that I interrupted you, Andre. But firstly, I'd just like to recognise the work of Professor Debs Robinson from the university. I think your commitment, Debs, to SEND and to our city is phenomenal, and I thank you deeply for your commitment to that. I know that Andre was going to talk about senior leadership and the importance of that in education, but particularly in SEND. And I feel that in the opportunity area in Derby, the commitment of our academics, our teaching staff, our local authority, as I've already said, actually does allow us to demonstrate that strength of leadership across the city that I do believe has been fundamental in how we've been able to deliver our SEND projects. But as everybody knows, the people on the board of the OA are strategic and are critical to make sure that voices are really clearly articulated for our young people in our city. And I want to make a personal thanks to Deb Skeering for her unwavering commitment, not only just as her time at the OA board, but to this city. Because it is without voices like Deb's, who can clearly and I think calmly, which is always very important, articulate and be the voice for our young people in the city. I think we've been incredibly privileged, Debs, to have you on our board. And I thank you for that very, very clear voice. And what we can now see in the legacy and sustainability of this opportunity area is that SEND and inclusion is at the heart of where we see we need to sustain our commitments. So just really to everybody in the audience and to everybody, I think, committed to SEND and inclusion, I would ask you today to commit and to continue to commit, but also to look at the importance of sharing best practice. And I really want that the Opportunity Area Derby is able to share that practice. And if we have some ideas post this conference, that we can collate these and look for further funding and further opportunities to really enable high quality, impactful teaching and engagement for all of our young people in the city. But for this conference, particularly young people with SEND, special educational needs and disabilities, which I believe if we get those engagements right, fundamentally improve education for all. So I apologise again for my late arrival. I was on time, I was just in the wrong place. But I thank all of the coordinators for putting this SEND conference together. And I really hope that you have a very engaging time. And as I said, I'm really looking forward to the outcomes of this conference so that we can continue to work collaboratively and move all of these projects forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kath. It's a privilege having you here this morning. Apologies for the technical issues, but it's wonderful to have had you. I am now going to hand over to Andre.
Thank you. Right, I'm just going to check that you can see a screen with some slides.
We can, Andre.
Right, okay, so it's great to be here. What I just want everyone to understand is at the moment, all I'm seeing is one screen with the slide on it and nothing else. So I can't pick up any queries that you're raising, but I will finish in enough time to take any questions. So if there are any posted, or if there is anyone able to ask a question, that will be possible. So I will make sure that I finish in enough time for some follow-up queries. It was great to be invited to join this event. It was meant to be last year, wasn't it? And that would have been great 2.5 years on after the Opportunity Area started. But things have been the way they are, and we've now moved on another year. Again, it was great to hear from Kath, the reflection on the great success of the Opportunity Area. I mean, DFE often set up a lot of initiatives. Some are more successful than others. And that's inevitable. You can't predict at the beginning precisely how things will turn out. And it has been brilliant that this Opportunity Area, particularly in Derby City, has really gelled and begun to make an impact. And I think that's really very powerful. Also, it was heartening to hear from Kath the sort of reflection that we need to get it right for all, and SEN is very important. And it's one of the old sort of adages amongst the SEN population that if a school gets it right for children with SEN, it's definitely getting it right for all children. And I think, again, that's beholden upon leaders in the system to think about how they are organizing the system to support the most vulnerable, because if we are getting it right for them, we're going to be getting it right for all and promoting the progress of all children. So it was great to hear that as well. What I want to do today is really focus on a little bit of recent research. I do think it's very important that that we understand what's going on, that we keep an eye. SEN is a very rich environment for research, and it's hard in the day-to-day management of the system to keep on top of everything that's coming out. So I just want to highlight one or two key ones in recent times. Then data, and I do think we always need to be conscious of benchmarking ourselves, where we are in relation to particular issues, and using data to plan ahead, to use it as a leadership tool for future planning. Of course, we can't forget COVID, and that has changed the agenda in the short and medium term. Whether it does in the long term is difficult to predict. We're currently doing an SEN review. I'll say a tiny bit about that, and then just a bit of reflection on recovery from the pandemic and moving forward generally. So it really is a time for effective leadership. Jerry, I'm assuming that everyone is seeing the slides as I change them. Let me know if that's not happening, otherwise I'll continue.
It's correct, Andre. Everything's just as you would hope.
Marvelous, marvelous. Okay, a really powerful and very strong piece of research was produced by the Education Policy Institute back in March, so about 2 or 3 months ago. And it's a major piece of work looking at how we as systems identify pupils with SEND. And one of the most powerful findings that it came up with was that when you look at differences in levels of SEND identification, half of all variation, so a significant proportion of any variation, is explained by which school the child attends. And that was equally true whether the child was had an EHC plan or was on SEN support. So there are factors within a school that lead to a child being identified as having a special educational need or not. And it's the school factors that are more important than anything about the individual child. And that really is very powerful. I think it's very important for us all to reflect on our identification processes, what we're bringing to bear. Schools seem to be focusing more on communication, language and literacy skills. Local authorities in their decision-making about EHC plans and funding are more aligned with personal, social and emotional development. Disadvantage matters. There is a high correlation between disadvantaged and SEN, but even within disadvantaged neighborhoods, the poorest of the disadvantaged groups lost out to the more affluent disadvantaged groups. So what's going on there? And I think these are all delicate factors that leaders need to tease out in relation to the identification of a child with SEN. Identifying a child with an SEN and disability is a very important decision in a child's life. It's done with the best of intention to help a child make progress, to ensure that they get access to specialist resources. But we also know that it brings children with SEN into that population of children who are more likely to end up in the figures for when they leave school for being NEET, not in employment, education or training. We also know that if you're a child with SEN, you're 5 times more likely to be permanently excluded by your school. So the very process of identification of SEN, whilst it's always well-intentioned, it also brings the child into a higher risk group for other less desirable factors, let's say. An interesting piece of research, I think it was in April or May, was to do with identification by season of birth. So summer-born children born in June, July or August, particularly boys, are more likely to be given the SEN label by the end of year 6. So there is a disproportionate level of identification depending on the season of birth. And of course, the quote there is that higher level provisions should be very much based on children's needs and disabilities, and these do not inherently vary by birth season. One can understand children who are coming in June, July and August birth dates as not being at the same level immediately as other children who have already been in school for a while. But one should not run to the SEN label as the way forward for that child. And again, I think that this research reminds us to take note of a variety of factors amongst the population that we are or we are not identifying as having SEN. Some research from Ofsted that came out recently, it's based on small numbers. They did some very in-depth work researching individual pupils' experiences. So it was a small number of children in a small number of schools. So it's not necessarily generalizable to all children in all schools, but the research does give some heads up about factors we need to consider about supporting children with SEND in mainstream. They found that most parents and carers were actually positive with the help and reassurance that teacher assistants gave their children. But there were some worries about the amount of time children spent out of class in small groups or individual interventions. Was this adding to the child's difficulties in the classroom or not? And I think some parents were worried that it might be. And barriers to effective provision, school staff not knowing the pupils well enough, so not understanding their learning styles and needs fully. School leaders not always involving families fully in provision planning. The process we know certainly since 2014 is co-production. There was still insufficient, families were still saying that they felt insufficiently involved by their schools in planning provision and in monitoring and reviewing. And of course, the importance of external agencies being available to work together was an issue. We also know that time for SENCOs for their role varies significantly from one school to another. There was a report published, I think it was last week, which again reinforced this issue about the variability in time for SENCOs. At the moment, this is a school decision, and schools are making different decisions about the amount of time they're providing for SENCOs in their role. Looking more widely, what we're seeing, what this graph is showing, is about the number of EHC plans in England. We are going through a period of very significant growth in the number of education, health and care plans. You can see that up to about 2015, there was a very static number of children and young people with an education, health and care plan. But since 2015, there's been a very steady rise. That includes population of those in FE who were not previously recorded. So the graph there on the most right-hand one, the 2021, the orange element of that bar is just about those not in FE. So it's all those with EHC plans not in FE, which you would think was the equivalent of the 2014 figure at the top of that. So that's all 2014, but you can see there's a significant increase. So there are children going up, the number of children with plans is going up. How does that compare? Well, if the leaders are trying to make comparisons with their own situation, there is data to be had. So here we have some data: leadership, knowing your population, understanding the sort of breadth of needs in your either in your local authority or in your school or other setting. SEN support, let's have a look there. In England, it's been going up steadily for the last 3 years, from 11.9% to 12.2%. What we can see, though, in Derby is a slightly different picture. 3 years ago, it was, well, I think we would call that significantly above the national average. But over the last 3 years, the figure has come down, and now Derby City is in line with the national average, 12.3% compared to 12.2%. So that's SEN support. For EHC plans, the number of pupils with EHC plans, as reflected in my previous graph, you can see is rising very significantly. What you can see also in Derby City is that it's also rising at a similar rate, but is also a fair bit above the national average. So SEN support is now in line with the national average. EHC plans are above the national average. And I think these are benchmarking questions for leaders. So people need to be able to compare and contrast their situation. What percent of my school population has SEN? What percent is at SEN support? What percent is has got an EHC plan? It's also possible to take data that was published last week, for example, by the department. Once a year, school census data produces data based on category of need. And one needs to be able to compare the category of need percentages in my school with the category of need nationally. What does all this data tell me about my pupils and about my school's SEN system, how my school is operating in relation to the identification of SEN? One of the things we need to always remember with data is that it's the start of a story rather than the end. If your school is significantly different from the comparisons with other schools, that might be a totally valid position to be in because of other factors that exploring the data will unpick. But I do think it's important to be able to draw another line here. So at the bottom of this line, England, Derby City, my school. Where does my school sit on that? How does my school compare? What's the story about my school's position in relation to my local authority and in comparison to England as a whole? And I think it is important that leaders do take this opportunity every now and then to look at data, to benchmark and to understand what the figures are. And the range of children in schools at SEN support is very, very wide. It might be 12.3% nationally, but the range goes from something like 6% to 45%. Why is that? Now, both figures might be explainable, but I think it's important that leaders are able to make that explanation. Moving on, the 2014 Act also tried to draw in the elements around disability and the needs and rights of disabled pupils, so bringing those together. And so there's a duty, which there has been for some time, on schools to make reasonable adjustments to accommodate the needs of disabled pupils. And in fact, during the time of pandemic, that's perhaps even more pronounced, that reasonable adjustments do need to be made more perhaps for disabled pupils than they were being before. The quote there, which I won't read out, but hopefully you can read yourselves, is from a Year 9 young man who whose progress I've been following for a while. He has no oral communication. He only uses eye gaze to communicate. He's in a wheelchair and is totally dependent on others for all independent skills, etc. He is in a mainstream secondary school. And the school has made all sorts of amazing adjustments to accommodate him. And he is very happy there. It's very important to him that he's in a mainstream class with his peers. It's been a challenge for the school, but they have never hesitated in providing the support that he needs and working with the local authority and health services. So it's an example there of reasonable adjustments tied in with provision made through the Children and Families Act, through the SEN legislation, that has led to the support for this child throughout mainstream. Another report that came out a couple of months ago was around admission of children with SEND. The school's adjudicator, who arbitrates on issues around and has oversight across the country on admission issues generally, but had a focus this time on admission of children with SEND, found that some schools were resistant to the admission of children with SEND. And of course, anyone on SEN support, there should be no question, well, there is no question in law that they should be in a mainstream school. But they did find that some schools were resistant, including a few cases where the child had an education, health and care plan. The school's adjudicator was surprised and concerned to learn that schools had to be directed to admit children. And particularly at a time of pandemic, one doesn't really think that should be happening. We need to remind ourselves again of the powerful and positive effects of mainstream inclusion. Again, it's really very important, I think, that leaders are fully versed in the research evidence about the impact of mainstream inclusion, because there are, of course, many challenges to that, aren't there? But there is evidence, there's plenty of evidence that inclusion in mainstream demonstrates positive gains in literacy and numeracy for children with SEND. They also show that, on balance, most studies show neutral or positive, or show more neutral or positive effects than negative effects on the academic progress of non-disabled pupils. In other words, sometimes there are concerns expressed that having children with SEN and disability in mainstream schools can have an adverse effect on the progress of other children. That is not borne out by research. And also for those children without SEND, there does seem to be a positive impact on their social and emotional development. There seem to be a reduction in discriminatory attitudes, for example, and higher responsiveness to the needs of others. So I think, again, at a time of challenge, when there are inevitably going to be some, it's important to hang on to the benefits of mainstream inclusion from a research point of view. Let's turn now to the pandemic and the sort of return to school. And I know it's up and down a bit. I've taken the 12th of May. We publish data once a week on data. So it's this was data at the 12th of May. So I've taken that date because since then there have been quite a number of children legitimately missing school because of exam leave and all of that. So this seemed a reasonable time. And again, you can see that at that point in time, the attendance for primary schools was almost back to what it is in a normal year. 96% in a normal year in 2019 to 20. It was at 95%. A bit lower in secondary schools, 89% compared to the normal of about 95%. A bit lower for special schools. Special school attendance at best times is only 90%. It was at 87% in May. And again, EHC plans in all schools was running at about 87%. So very encouraging generally in terms of the message for EHC plans in schools, 87%. It does leave 13%, which is a fairly sizable proportion of children with EHC plans not in school. How are they being supported? I'll turn to one or two issues around that shortly. But I think one of the things that people learned, and it was probably always there, but sometimes you need something like this for it to be spelt out and to hit you smack in the face, as it were. The value that children and parents place on school generally. Take it away and it is hugely missed. So these are some quotes from some children and their parents. I won't read them all out. Let me just pick a couple. For my son, the last two lockdowns, he really struggled with the work at home and the lack of routine. These are challenges around supporting children at home. He is at school this time and the difference in him is amazing. I think that quote was made in about March. The middle one on the right, I'm shielding. This is a young man who's got severe health problems and has been unable to attend for nearly a year. But the value he places on the support from the school. Every day I join for tutor time when I can see my friends and be part of the group. This social time and teaching has been a lifeline and contributed positively to my mental health. So clearly schools are valued by children and families, and I think that's been one of the important learnings from the pandemic. We also need to, again, look at research. There's been a lot of research that's been coming out regularly throughout the pandemic around the impact on children generally, health and well-being, etc. Another significant piece of work which the DFE published last month, or this month, a lot of assessment data from 3,000 primary schools, 2,000 secondary schools. All year groups have experienced a learning loss in reading, and the learning losses in maths were even greater. So all children are at risk of falling into this group, those who have experienced a learning loss. Those in high levels of disadvantage have experienced higher levels of loss than other schools. The reasons underneath that are not clear, but it's important for those schools who are in high levels of disadvantage to understand this position. And also that attainment gap, which has been at the heart of dealing with disadvantage over the last 10 years, that attempt to narrow the attainment gap, the impact of the pandemic does seem to be making that wider, which is a very significant concern. So in summary, another piece of work which ties in with that last one, again, the Education Policy Institute have found that disadvantaged pupils experienced greater disruption. This is due to technology. They didn't have access to it. Teacher guidance wasn't as available for them. Learning materials weren't as personalized for them, or they found it hard to access, and they weren't provided with supplemental private tutoring. So there are significant barriers to parent support for home learning. I'll come to that in a second. So, and also pupil engagement in remote learning. Now, I'm going to say a bit more about remote learning shortly, but remote learning, remote teaching, something that we really didn't know much about at the beginning of 2020, but halfway through 2021, the world of remote learning has advanced enormously. But what we do know, what we are finding is that pupil engagement in it varies, and there's a number of factors in that. But also, it did seem that those in schools with the highest levels of deprivation had the lowest levels of pupil engagement. There are also issues about mental health conditions. Turning to mental health conditions, again, disadvantaged groups, those from lower income families or those with special educational needs, have got elevated, higher levels of mental health issues. So again, we need to make sure that we are prioritizing well-being, and we've certainly launched the Wellbeing for Education Recovery Programme, which is being led by every local authority, and I would like to think, is known by most schools present today. It's certainly been used to fund additional senior mental health leads in secondary schools and wider. But this is designed to support schools in providing support for children who are experiencing additional COVID pressures. I said I'd say a bit more about remote learning. This was a survey of over 1,700 parents in London. So it was carried out during springtime. What it found was that only 13% of those parents felt that remote learning fully met their child's needs. 45% said it partly met their needs, but a significant number said it did not meet their needs. And we wondered why that was, and they put their concerns in rank order. So the number one concern, my child does not have the ability to concentrate and learn at home. And again, we know, don't we, that lots of children with special educational needs have attention difficulties. They need lots of adult guidance. They need lots of specialist adult guidance. And that's quite hard for parents to provide at home, and home may not be the right learning environment. So we need to be wary of that. The lack of routine, which was actually mentioned in one of the quotes from the young people, is a problem for some children. Lack of interaction with other children, that's important to children with SEN. Parents not confident to support my child with schoolwork. Children with special educational needs usually require expert and experienced teaching, and we can't expect that to be automatically provided by parents. So in all, we need to be very careful about any assumptions we make that remote learning that's provided for a class will work for children with special educational needs. There are considerable challenges for making it work for that group, and I think we need to be very cautious about the use of remote learning. Of course, it's better than no teaching and learning, but where it's an option, is it really necessary? So the recovery support so far from DfE over the last 12 months has gone up to £3.1 billion across early years, schools and the 16 to 19 sector. That includes the National Tutoring Programme, some teacher training, training for early years staff to support children's learning and development. That includes a very specialist language and communication programme for reception classes. And the forthcoming summer school programs, and a very significant number of mainstream schools have registered for the programs. That's also available to specialist schools who are receiving funding to provide that. So I'm nearly finished. There is an SEND review. It's a cross-government review. It started just before the pandemic, and of course that's had an impact on two things. Firstly, the timescale with which the review is moving. That's had some delay because of the pandemic, but also we want to consider the learning and the issues that arise from the pandemic to see whether there are long-term impacts that need to be addressed. But the review is going to be focusing on three main areas. How do we achieve high quality outcomes? How do we narrow that attainment gap? We want to make sure that we can back mainstream schools to better meet the needs of the majority of children with SEND. So how can schools be more supported than they are? And how can the EHC plan system be more streamlined and consistent? It's a time for effective SEND leadership. That's always been important, but at a time following the pandemic, it's even more important. So some key features would be creating a positive, supportive environment for all pupils, where all pupils feel welcome, where parents seeking a new school feel that they're welcome. Co-production, that issue about working with parents and children and young people, working together, working on joint solutions. Complementing high quality teaching with small group and one-to-one interventions that work well, and attending events like this and other similar events are important because there will be some nuggets that can be picked up. We need to be careful about continuing to deliver the same diet where it's not showing any impact. We need to think differently after a while. SENCOs have an enormous range of knowledge, skills and experience. Are school leaders fully making the most of that and integrating their skills into the overall life of the school and influencing the agenda for children with SEN and wider disadvantaged groups? Having high expectations, expecting more. Focus on reasonable adjustments. It's a statutory duty. It's probably more important now as children are returning, trying to get back into learning from the pandemic, but there may be issues there. Distributed leadership and teamwork. We can't just leave it to one person. There's got to be a belief across all. Think SEND across the board. Really make sure that everyone has got that in their line of sights. Okay, I'm going to, I think, stop sharing and rejoin you all. And right, so I'm back and I'm happy to take questions. How should we organise this, Jerry?
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andre. Just before we get into questions, can I thank you so much for that really informative focus you've placed on Derby in particular has generated some questions at the side, which I'll share with you in a moment. And the focus on remote learning is so, and the effects of the pandemic on children with special educational needs is really interesting, and also, as you can imagine, generated questions. Also, I could just say that the next keynote will also pick up on this further, so you pitched that just beautifully. And also workshop 3 is about exploring remote learning. So Andre, thank you, a wonderful keynote, which has been really relevant.
I can see the questions actually, so
you don't need me to read them out.
I'm happy to take them in order. I think Kate starts, is that right? Kate Browning is the first one?
They start from the bottom actually with anonymous.
Oh,
so, the first one. So the first question that came in was,
how does the rise of VHC plans correlate with birth rates? It's way above the increase in the pupil population or the child population. I don't have the data, but it's something you can imagine we ask ourselves, and certainly the rise in EHC plans does not correlate with the rise in any pupil population. Do other local authorities still have access to other routes of funding compared to Derby just having the EHC route? That I can't answer about all other authorities. And I think it's something for leaders in Derby, school leaders and local authority leaders, and I would suggest your school's forum to reflect on that, whether that is one of the issues driving the increase in funding locally. So different local authorities have a degree of latitude around how they organise funding, high needs funding allocation for schools. There's a degree of latitude, not a huge amount, but they do vary. And I think it's just one of those things that one would need to delve into with local leaders. So I would think the schools forum would need to be involved in that, as well as representative head teacher leaders and local authority leaders. Derby City has raised that a large amount of funding is spent on out of authority specialist settings. What is the breakdown of these pupils in terms of need and pupil premium?
I assumed that was pupil premium status,
pupil premium. Yeah. The data is available. I don't have it at my fingertips. I could probably find it in 10 minutes. But generally, local authorities across the country are worried about the number of placements made in out of area specialist settings. The number in independent and non-maintained special schools has continued to rise for the last 5 years. That tends to be a more expensive setting to place a child in. And local authorities want to make sure that they are developing a system, so they're strengthening their within local authority capacity. So making sure that their own special schools are able to accommodate a wider range of need is usually a very important part of a strategy, as well as doing what I was saying the review wants to do, is look at how we can strengthen mainstream schools as well, because sometimes there are some oddities in placements. It's difficult to, that data would be available. I can't say who, anonymous, Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous. That data is available, and it's always interesting to break that down. Kate Browning, do we envisage a need to make revisions to the SEND code of practice following consultation? It's almost impossible to imagine that one will be able to bring in the changes that will be needed without changes to the code of practice, but I can't categorically say today that it will change. That would be preempting the publication of the review. And what I can say is the review will be published, and when it is, there will be a period of consultation. So people like everyone here today will be able to feed in either individually or collectively. I mean, a shared view from the learning from the Derby opportunity area about what makes a difference for children with SEND would be a good thing in principle. So, so it's impossible to say whether it will be necessary, but I can't imagine it won't. Right, anything else, Jerry?
No, that is the last of the questions that have come up in the chat or in the Q&A. Feel free, we're still here for a moment. If you're frantically typing, do keep going. Oh, was that one more or just a general pinging in? No, I think that's fine. Andre, it just brings me great pleasure to thank you for everything that you, I thought I could hear somebody typing, so to speak. So there's one in from Sarah Leagood. You might just be able to see that.
Are there plans to expand the data set and approach to include post-16 providers? I provided data mostly on schools today, that the level of SEN support is only about schools. The 3.7% of EHC plans, that was related just to the school population. But we do have that first bar chart. If you remember that first bar, the top end of that was the number of children, of young people not in school. So that includes post-16. The data on post-16 providers is available. What I'm going to take away from this is next time I talk to an audience like this, I need to preempt this question and include some FE-focused data. It is available.
Thank you so much, Andre. As we have just a few moments left, and that will just give anyone just a moment if they want to ask another question. If you, if we were to look forward a couple of years, where would you like to see SEND provision, if that's a question that's worth asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think increasingly with the changes in the school system, I think schools are becoming much stronger together, and we need to make sure that that brings in SEN, and there's more collaboration, sharing of services, information and expertise amongst schools themselves, and more problem solving at school level without the need to turn to the local authority for support with the more complex. So really building up stronger expertise and services across a range of schools, I think is a really important way forward, the way the education agenda is going.
Andre, that's really interesting, of course, to us here in Derby, having done the peer review and generated with expertise among schools. The local authority are supporting with having SEND ambassadors in the city, and people here today will be taking on that role. And I think that collaborative part is what this opportunity area has really brought to us. So I think that seems a wonderful moment to say thank you to you for all your answers.
Thank you.
Time this morning. We know you have important meetings to go to later on, so we don't want to keep you from those. There would be applause now, so I shall just do it on my own, but I'm sure there's others around.
Thank you, Jerry. Yeah, thanks to everyone for all your work over the last 3.5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre.